And if I can invite our three panellists to come to the stage, this will be a great opportunity for some meaty conversation. So firstly, Mark Kalinski is the Chief Executive Officer of Community Living Australia and has more than 26 years' experience in the disability sector. Mark strives to strengthen and build stronger communities through robust citizenship principles, where everyone is valued for the contribution to community that they bring. Mark is proud to lead the Community Living Australia team to provide quality, personalised services meeting the needs and aspirations of clients and families and working within an NDIS framework. Mark's vision is that we build a society that is self-sustaining and includes people living with a disability to choose how they live, learn, work, love, play and connect with their community and discover new horizons to lead fulfilling lives. Welcome, Mark. David Knox is an Australian oil and gas industry executive. Currently, he is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Australian Naval Infrastructure, ANI. Prior to his appointment at ANI, David was the CEO and MD of Santos Limited from 2008 to 2015. He's held management and engineering positions both in Australia and in multiple locations around the world for companies such as BP, Arco and Shell. Among numerous directorships, David is the chair of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, TAXI, and is the deputy chair of the SA Economic Development Board. And Lois Boswell is the Deputy Chief Executive of the Department for Communities and Social Inclusion. She is an experienced executive and public policy expert who's advised on and influenced many public policy areas including development, planning, mental health, equity, environment, child protection, further education and consumer affairs. In 2013, she was rightly recognised by the Governor of South Australia and entered into the Women's Honour Roll. Welcome, Lois. So, Alison, would you please come and resume a seat on the stage? And I understand that the Foundation has identified some recurring questions from meetings with community over the last month, and we'll have those from audience members to kick off the panel discussion. And after that, I'll throw open to the rest of the audience for questions you might have in the moment. But before that, we have our first question that comes from our Premier, Jay Weatherill, who couldn't be with us today, but who has a particular interest in this conversation and wanted to put a question to our panel members.
How can we build on our history of social innovation in South Australia to build our future economic prosperity?
Just a small question to open up there. Anyone feeling a burning desire to jump in on that? Mark?
I guess just to start off, we heard Alison speak about the old Royal Adelaide hospital site, and I think we do need to look at how we can share our knowledge and come up with new ideas and challenge old ideas together in a space. And I think if we build an innovation hub on a site like that, where people can come together naturally and work together, we can actually create new opportunities, new products, new ways of providing community services, doing social good, and export it to the world.
David?
A couple of things. I think the first thing is we've got to recognise how important social innovation is, and I'm very fortunate of that list of things to chair TAXI. It's a fantastic organisation, but it's unsung, it's out of sight, and if you ask the political class in this state or around Australia, they probably don't even know it exists. And yet it does extraordinary work. So the first thing we do is we actually lift the profile of social innovation just in its entirety. And Alison obviously is doing a massive job in helping us have that discussion and helping people like myself start to understand some of the language and what it all means. So I think the hospital is a classic example of where we've got to get it right, and we can probably talk about that a little bit more. It's a really good opportunity to do a fantastic job. But I think I'll probably go to another example, and I saw Mike Runge was in the room here, who's on the EDB with me. And I go to the example of the Aging Well, which the Economic Development Board has chosen one of their themes. And I think when that was conceived by the Economic Development Board, it was fundamentally or principally an economic opportunity. It was through an economic lens as to how do we, as populations age, how do we allow people to continue to be entrepreneurs in their, as they get older. So you have the entrepreneurs in your 70s, your 80s. How do you do that? How do you use both, technology, or also where you live, the communities you live in, to make connections, to really create economic wealth? So that, I think, was the original concept. What's happened, and I'm glad to see it's happened, is this conversation has moved to a much more balanced conversation where there's now, how do we lift all boats? How do we lift the opportunity for those that are not so well off, who are not in a great economic position, who actually are quite disadvantaged? How do we get them to live really well in their older years? And how do the two meet? And clearly it's obvious, I think, and obviously probably going to the converted in this room, that those two things are not opposites, they're actually complementary. You lift those that are perhaps having difficulties up, then clearly you have economic benefits from that. You improve the participation in the economy of older people, clearly you have economic benefits of that. So the two are absolutely complementary. So I think the more we can get the conversation around economics and social and lifting all boats and the contribution of social innovators, the more likely we are to be really successful.
And a focus at either end of the age spectrum.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting.
I'll give you, you could do it at the other end of the spectrum, but...
Lois.
Yeah, I very much agree with David. I love the look on the Premier's face there, because he knows that's a wicked question. And I also know that he asks it a lot. I'm always fascinated by how little Adelaide understands and values its assets. Because I've moved here twice. I'm a Sydneysider. I moved here at 22 the first time, quite intentionally. And I was a little bit puzzled at the time by the fact the buses didn't run on Sundays. But I then went and lived in the north coast of New South Wales in a village of 500 people after a decade here. And then I came back because Adelaide has something quite special. When I lived in that little village of 500 people, I learnt an awful lot about community. You have to get on with everyone when you live with 500 people. Like, there is no choice. But Adelaide has that mid-sized city thing that means that all that ability for collaboration and social innovation exists in its DNA. And it does it all the time. You can have conversations in policy making and sector making in Adelaide that you just don't have in other cities. And you can have build sort of relationships. Adelaide sort of operates very much under the surface in some ways. It's a network city, a city about who you know. I think that, the Independent Commission Against Corruption has sort of said, he dug around, I heard him speak once, I couldn't really find corruption in Adelaide. And I think it's because there's a thing where Adelaide operates less on money and more on networks. And that's really, really important in innovation. With the NDIS, which I think is the greatest disruptor, I was a bit bamboozled when one day I was talking to someone in the sector and they said to me, oh, look, we're not really wanting to talk to you guys too much because you're the competitor now. But I know that we've all been talking since because, in fact, as you've said, Alison, we're only going to solve these ones together, and I think that we really have the ability to do that. Probably the bit that I've taken out of your talk today is finding the oil of those conversations, that the bringing together facilitation. We've got groups like Renew Adelaide. I mean, if you think about what organisations like Renew Adelaide have done as unsung heroes, and Taxi and Dunstan Foundation do as unsung heroes, it's quite extraordinary. With that entire Toppen Mall precinct, I don't know if people walk through it, but it was absolutely dead, horrible space until a little while ago. And then very much, Renew Adelaide is purely a social entrepreneurial thing that's brought together between property owners and creatives who want to try to just regenerate anything that doesn't look active. It's changed the face of the city very subtly, but we barely celebrate it. More of the bringing together of those those ideas, and more of the celebrating hubs and ideas, I think, is the answer to that wicked question.
Yeah. Lois, there's such gold in what you've just said about the reframe around the networks in Adelaide, which we often have that cringe about, networky Adelaide, as the essential, the prerequisites for collaboration and co-creation, right? I think there's gold in that, yeah. Good reframe. So, questions from partners in the audience. Perhaps one to Alison, if we have one direct. We're just bringing a mic.
Thank you. Alison, I'm just mindful of the observation Lois just made about SA's recognition about our own assets, and I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what has struck you the most about being in SA and how we conduct ourselves in SA?
Yeah, so I would pick up on the networking piece. I've had an opportunity to use this expression about 3 times. Oh, that's Adelaide, right? Because you meet someone at one of these events and then you run into them at the supermarket, or you run into them somewhere else, or, oh, this person, you can't really say anything against anybody because they're going to be related to somebody. So I figured all of that out. And I actually think that is a huge strength. That is a huge strength. I mean, there are challenges around, not wanting to annoy people because you're going to have to end up working with them or be related to them. But it's a huge strength because you can get stuff done. You know exactly who to talk to. And if you don't, you know someone who's within 1 to 2 degrees of separation. The councillors, the decision makers are incredibly accessible. I have this cute picture that I use about meeting with the Premier, where he came to the Central Market in a little cafe with a reserve sign with a yellow Post-it note that said Jay. I took a picture of it because I said, wait a minute, aren't people going to mob him? Nope. Walked in by himself. We had a great conversation. No one bugged him, and he left. Okay, that doesn't happen in other places. It really doesn't. And so the fact that he is so accessible and he's just one manifestation of this issue means that you're incredibly well positioned to take the assets that you have. You just have to value them and link them and broker them, and Bob's your uncle. Did you use that expression? Bob's your uncle? Okay, good. Okay.
I think there's another side to that coin, though, Alison. If you're in the networks and sort of in the know and have that might feel great. Can lead to complacency as well, and comfort and all that. But really, we've got to attract real talent from outside, and really from the best brains in the world to people who are in serious trouble, who need our help because they're in dire situations in camps, etc. We need to attract them into Adelaide. And by doing that, I think we can lift all boats and drive economic value. So we've got to get much better connecting with people we don't actually know as well, and bring them in, and then you can create real value. So it mustn't be a club, but otherwise it's going to probably wither. It's got to be much more embracing, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think taking, understanding what you've got, and then recognizing that you need to be incredibly intentional about reaching out and bringing this new, this unusual stakeholders in is wonderful.
That's right. Yeah.
Another question.
It's me. I think it's me. So, Alison, how have you gone on this visit in terms of engaging the public sector? And I remember when you were here last time, you kept telling us quite strongly, we can't just always go to government with our hand out and expecting government to rescue us, which I completely agree with. So what's the new way we should think about engaging government as part of the social economy?
Thank you, Carolyn. So it's Carolyn, who's the Chief Executive at Taxi. If you're interested in more about Taxi, she will chat with you. I've found that in the first visit, people did say a lot, I went to government and they said no, and, well, that's it. I'm like, what? What? That's the beginning of the conversation. That's not the end of the conversation. And there was this real sense that government will fix it for us. Government is the only way. And I actually don't hear that as much now. And people recognize that there's opportunities to engage other people. I would say that it's really incumbent upon us to do the work as community, to figure out who the players are that we want to bring to the table, and to bring government as one of those critical players, but don't let them set the table. It's not their job to set the table. It's our job to set the table and invite them as one of the key players, because they have so much expertise and we have so much to learn from them, but so do other players. And that's the kind of valuing role that sort of levels the playing field. And I know we have the power dynamics because they have the grants and all that other stuff you have to deal with, but we can't have tail wagging dog. We've got to figure out another way. Thank you.
From the perspective of the public sector, Lois, would you like to reflect on that?
I'm not sure. I
I'm inviting
actually do want to reflect on it, but it might Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite an exposing question.
Yeah.
I like to operate inside government as possibly an internal irritant, and so therefore I've always deeply valued external irritants, because it's really hard to get anything done in government if you haven't got allies pushing it. Because we teach people in the public sector to be risk averse. And it's very hard slog to teach people not to be risk averse, because I think we do something very early in somebody's career in the public sector where they get something wrong and they, get a lecture, and I don't know what happens, but there's layers upon layers of risk averse. So you need external voices, but it has to not be the cap in hand stuff, because that doesn't work. It also gives people a nice power trip to just say, oh no, or the alternative is, I can't because I actually don't have that much power, which they don't want to necessarily admit, as opposed to the collaborative relationships. I've been talking a lot because the DCSI finds itself, the Department of Communities and Social Inclusion, which is very long to say, finds itself in this really complex position at the moment of going from the funder in the National Disability Disability Services to really just a player and a participant in a very complex system. And so I keep talking about we need to reset our mindset inside the department, as well as the mindset of the organisations we've traditionally funded, about our relationship. Our relationship we're not Big Brother anymore. I don't have a magic wand. I can't solve things with money anymore. I don't get the power to say yes or no. But I see an enormous system change, a huge social problem and opportunity that we have to get together to get right, and there's real risk in it. So we've got to find ways to reset that relationship and work with the sector to do that. And I think that's a very healthy thing to challenge us all the time. I had a conversation the other day. I was sitting at a desk and saying, look, we're going to bring everybody together and do some stuff where we talk about how they could co-design putting people into various places in accommodation services. And the person sitting with me, and I said, so we'll bring the list and we'll put that. And she said, oh no, we won't do that. And I said, why won't we put the list of people looking on the table? Well, because we don't do that. And I said, why? Why don't we do that? She took a moment, she said, give me a minute. I'm just I guess there isn't a reason. And there isn't a reason. It's just been that we've been in the power dynamic, so we've kept your data and information to ourselves. So I think redefining relationship with government is actually the only way forward in the social economy. And we really need to do that across all spheres, not just in disability, but all spheres.
Great, we need that disruptive thinking.
Don't start me on that one again,
Right, okay. Moira Deslands from Chooks SA.
Thanks, Mia. My question's about the purpose economy and language. Is that the right language we should be using? And tell me a bit about why make that choice.
I laughed at that because when I think it was Alison or maybe it was Carolyn who had that question about the purpose economy, I thought, what are we talking about? What on earth is the purpose economy? So this is one of the things that, as chair of Taxi, I really do find, because it's a completely new set of language, and we've got to unpack that. I think you mean the social economy, do we? But it is a very important word, because it goes to Lois's point. If we don't know what the purpose is, and then don't give people the permission to achieve the purpose, which is what Lois did when she gave that lady the permission to put people into housing, if we don't know what the purpose is, then things don't get done. So it's a really important word that we understand when you go to a meeting, what is the purpose of this meeting? But it goes to what's the purpose of this organization? What is the purpose of what we're trying to achieve? And once you've sort of agreed that, and in the business world, we often say, well, we sit down in the meeting and say, right, okay, why are we here? What's the purpose of today? What's the purpose of the next hour? And once you've defined that, it makes things a hell of a lot easier. And then you give permission to everybody to have a go at the purpose and answer the question. And then all boats lift and off you go. But anyway,
Yes.
I didn't understand what that purpose meant when I first came into this room. I'm beginning to understand a little bit more now.
We need to show everybody Simon Sinek's TED Talk, don't we? Why? Yeah. Mark, did you want to reflect on that at all?
I guess if you look at why we do things, and having a purpose economy, it's about impact, and the impact we have across our communities, across South Australia, across the world. And if we don't make an impact, what's the point of doing it?
Yes.
Alison, you talked about the need for us to develop our skills around systems and design thinking, and also the need for us to change our mindset. What other skills do you think we're going to need to thrive in Adelaide, and how do we get there? How do we build those skills?
Well, I think there's lots of ways to, I think, Caroline has been doing some pretty amazing work globally on that work, and I think she's going to be one of the huge leaders in this space. I think you have Suhit here from Business Model Inc. Likewise, they've been doing some work globally on this, and so I think there's some huge opportunities to figure out exactly, this is where you start with the asset map, right? You figure out what we've got in abundance, look at the underutilized resources, map them out, and see what we're missing. And I think we will find that we're missing the connective tissue. Even though we all know each other, we haven't been able to connect for purpose. And so that, I think, is something that we'll look to build. One of the programs I'm most proud of at Mars is something called Studio Y, which is training young leaders to succeed not just succeed, but to thrive in the 21st century through things like systems thinking and design thinking and ethnography and all of that kind of stuff. So I think there's huge models and opportunities we can learn from, and I'd like to see them embedded into the educational system as well.
Yes. Yes.
Question. I want to go to the question of the SA brand, and you've raised another one in there, which is there's more to life as a brand. And we have lots of brands. How do we get cut through? We've talked about purpose economy, talked about social capital, social economy, social innovation. How do we get cut through? Susie Souza, when she was here, said, we've got all these brands, just pick one. and let's get some focus on that.
Yeah. So I'd be really interested in the group. I will just start by saying that we did meet with Brand SA. They know how to do this stuff. I am not a marketer or a communicator. Okay, I can talk about stuff. But I think it's really important that we engage expertise to help us figure that out. And they are very interested, from what we heard, and David can elaborate on this, on trying to help figure out what a brand hierarchy would look like, because you have a bazillion brands here. And they apply in different elements for different audiences, and so that's valid. But should there be an overarching narrative, I think that's what they're going to help us figure out. So I think it's about engaging those with expertise. Does anybody help?
Well, it's a very interesting question, but I think the really powerful brands have got extraordinary substance underneath them. So they're not just they've really got deep substance. So you can actually say, yeah, that's what the substance behind that particular area is. And I think there's a few things that are happening. And there's one I think we've absolutely stumbled on, almost by accident here in this state, and that's come out of this crisis around energy. And I think there's all of a sudden, instead of, the federal government have helped us by being so massively critical, they've shone a spotlight on it, and then everyone's saying, hang on a minute, that's not a bad idea, I quite like that. Because what that then produces is a global view, and people say, Adelaide's got more than 50% renewable energy. Right now it's 44% today. Night it's 100%. I quite like that. And that's got real substance. And then, of course, from that, then you can create other things where social enterprises that truly care about the planet, you sort of say, well, we've got a unique selling point. It's not just a brand. We've got a unique selling point. You come here, and you're not got a carbon footprint. We're off. We get all the big guys and girls, and they come here. That's what we really need to focus on. What's the real substance? Food, agriculture, health, tourism, just a great, fantastic place to live. These are things of real substance, and that's I think where we should really push the brand, because as someone who's lived in lots of other places in the world, this is a fantastic place, and we've got all the stuff we need to make it even better and lift all the boats.
I think we just really need to be careful that we move away from marketing spin. I think in South Australia, probably across the world, we're sick of just spin. It needs to have real meaning and purpose, and which shows impact again.
Yeah.
But we can't do it if people come to Adelaide and see people sleeping on the streets. That ain't going to work. Then it's bust. So you've got to fix some of these things. You can't be false in this. You've got to be real, and we've got to do all that stuff, and I think we can.
Yeah, real substance, heart, values.
My question's for Mark. I don't want to say an Alison groupie, but you've had lots of time spent with Alison over the last couple of weeks and few months. What would you say are the common themes or key topics that have resonated with you over the last while?
I've got an autograph book full of Alison's signatures. So. Look, I think the main thing is a move from recognition and acknowledgement of having to do things differently across the community sector to I guess, acknowledge weak points in our business models. So we need to be more business-like in the sector, not just disability sector, across the whole community service sector. And acknowledgement that we need different tools to do it better. So from IT, and then that leads to data, and how do we analyse that data? So it's really important. There was a lot of discussion that there's a lot of information and data that we don't use in the sector in South Australia, so we need to think about how we do that. But also how do we do our back of house activities, and how can we do that smarter? You know, it's not a strength of our sector, back of house. Some organisations do it exceptionally well, some do it okay, and others just don't do it. But when it comes to client work, they do that really well. So the concept of shared services. And one of the things that I'm hearing, and there's a lot of different talk with different groups about setting up shared services arrangements. What we need to do now is join those dots and bring them together so they're not working against each other, they're working with each other for the sector and for our clients. I guess just to follow up on risk, one of the things that we're hearing too, that we've developed a culture of not taking risks across the community service sector, and we need to change that. So we need different thinkers in our sector, or we just need to be brave and break the model and do things differently. And one of the things that I've learned through being part of the thinkers is come across a great organisation in Taxi. And the way that the concept of how they help organisations pilot, do things different on a small scale. So if it fails, you're not wasting a lot of time and a lot of money. You're actually quarantining it to a small thing. If it's successful, you build on it.
Final question here.
Hi. So I want to ask maybe a comment and a question might come from that. I haven't prepared anything before coming here, so it's sort of the comment and the question has been evolving since hearing Alison and you guys as the panel. So if I use myself as a microcosm and as a businesswoman, Mia has given you a bit of background to where I've come from to be a businesswoman. And in that, in my welcome, I shared with you, as well as Mia sharing with you where I've come from, that is Australian history and stolen generation. I want to share with you how there's so much more to loss and grief than death and dying. General community, in my experience, certainly in South Australia, has very limited understanding of what loss and grief is and what it can do. So what I found myself doing 30 years ago was using loss and grief to find my way out of what I call grief fear into what I call my intuitive intelligence. And so what I found I was able to do intuitively was make decisions about what do I want to do with my life now that I've come out of grief fear and I'm in my intuitive intelligence. That's when I realised that I set up the Sacred Site Within Healing Centre and then go on to Australian Institute for Loss and Grief. So back in the day when I was looking at setting up a business, I would suggest that I had very little practical support and practical help. The biggest reason that I went into business and maintained it is because I was coming from my intuitive intelligence, which is where I was able to adapt and incentivise and to then maintain the business. When I hear people talk about businesses, what I constantly hear, I would suggest, is practicalities. But what I think is constantly missing is people's fears of setting up a business, but also how do they maintain that? I understand, and obviously I've got no stats on me, but I heard over the years when I was first setting up that businesses fail in the first year. And why is that? There may be so much practical support out there, but if they're coming from grief, fear, then it's only just a matter of time before their businesses fail. So maybe the question is coming as I'm talking. Why do you guys think that is a missing component, a serious, major component to people not just going into business, but then to maintain their business? And I think, this type of teaching is what's missing in universities, in small business, because at the end of the day, I'm a human being just like anybody else. So what I'm talking about, my going from grief, fear into intuitive intelligence, is a human possibility.
Alison, would you reflect on that? Yeah.
So the stats that we have in Canada are that 1 in 10 businesses will succeed. And so I can come up because I can see you now. Okay. So there's lots of reasons why they fail. Sometimes the idea isn't even, there's no market. It just someone else is already doing things. They haven't figured it out. Running a business is hard work, as you well know. There's lots of ups and downs. People don't have the cash flow to manage it. They don't have financing. They have to bootstrap or rely on family or friends or credit cards or mortgage in their house. There's many, many reasons why businesses fail, for sure. What I would like to see is business advisors who understand social purpose businesses, who understand the complexities of getting beyond a single bottom line. I would be really interested in, working with you later to hear about your particular experience given the journey that you've been through and how you could use that to help others if you're so inclined. And I think there's huge opportunities to think about how we can bring some of those hardcore business folks together to help bring a discipline alongside those who understand social impact work and the challenge of bringing them together for impact. So it's really hard. That's why they fail. I mean, at the end of the day, it's...
If I could just comment, first of all, thank you for a very generous welcome to country, Rosemary. And I was reflecting as the conversation went on, you talked about thousands of years of reshaping a boomerang, and David said I can do everything in 9 months, including across the country. I think that I've been reflecting a bit in terms of this conversation and in terms of what's going on with the National Disability Insurance Scheme, about how much we, and with the general move to more values-based being in the world, how far we've come from a baby boomers generation that used the resources they had and accumulated wealth from a fear of loss, a fear of a loss and grief, much shorter lived than Aboriginal people's loss and grief, but coming out of a war, to a Generation X that I'm part of. I'm sort of day one, I think, of Generation X, that then just bought a consumerism myth, something chronic, didn't we? And we believed we had to have the career, the quarter-acre block, we had to have amass wealth, and that was some form of measure of success. To watching a generation now that dips in and out of work, a sharing economy that is about piecing together different bits of work. And for those who don't understand stuff about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the change that's going on when we are creating, now I could describe it ungraciously as a voucher system, but I actually think it's more fundamental than that. We're taking people who have been the most dictated to and the most disadvantaged in our society, and we're giving them a control over a budget to spend in a market that we haven't yet created. It's kind of an extraordinary thing. But it will mean that you need a different set of values about work and about what's important in life and about how you engage in that. And I think for me, my generation, I'm terrified of the statistic that we tell everyone, which is your business is going to fail in the first 12 months. But I think we're dealing in a world of a sharing economy. That means that relationship between capital and labour just actually isn't there. There will shortly not be that. Those jobs are rarer and rarer and rarer. And it's the positive deviation stuff that we need to learn from and learn how to give people the resilience that you obviously have mastered to do that. I had a fascinating conversation as part of Open State yesterday because I'm also the president of the Australian Refugee Association with Alexander about ways to assist refugees to set up businesses, and it's all about resilience and about perhaps getting a little bit of regulation knocked on the head, but it's all about resilience. So I think, if anything, you've got the business model to teach all of us how to answer that question, I suspect.
Yeah, I think this whole aspect of fear is incredibly important, not just in small businesses, but even in the very largest businesses. And somehow you've got to give permission, or give people the permission to not fear failure.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you fear failure, you'll either be paralyzed, you won't make decisions, or you won't start. And so somehow we've got to to have a crack and not be successful is far better than just never getting on the playing field at all. Yeah. So I think one of the leadership acts that could happen in the public service, it can happen in big business or anywhere, even small businesses, is to somehow give permission that not everything's going to work all the time. Don't be frightened of failure. Actually, just say, oh, I learned a bit there, and move on. Because that fear of failure is paralyzed. But it paralyzes big businesses. Because what happens in a big business is there's fear of failure in the ranks, nobody makes a decision, everything gets punted upstairs, and then there's total paralysis. Because whoever is at the top just can't manage the bandwidth. It falls in a heap. So you've got to make sure that everyone in the business is actually not frightened, capable of making a decision. If they something doesn't go well, it's not a mistake. It just didn't go well. Not everything goes well, and move on. And so I think managing that aspect, you're onto something there. But don't be frightened, and encourage others not to be frightened. Otherwise, you won't start. And we need people to start.
I think just one other thing, a bad idea today mightn't be a bad idea tomorrow. So right. and I think it's really, really important that we have a platform that we can share things that have worked and things that haven't worked. And it's about, again, working together, tapping into expertise and experience from other people that may be outside the sector or within the sector, and get away from this notion government isn't the enemy, but that we can compete without being fearful of working together, and I think that's really important.
I just had a super quick thought, which is, did people read the new CEO of Uber when he was getting ready to leave his existing organization, and he wrote a letter and he said, I have to tell you, I'm scared to death of taking on this new challenge. And so having these kind of business leaders admit vulnerability and admit that they don't have it all figured out is actually a huge strength. I'm a personal believer that we all have our stories to tell, that we all have our vulnerabilities, and it actually makes us more human, back to that connection element. And pretending that we have it all figured out is actually doing the other a disservice. And so I would throw that in there as well.
Yeah, it gives permission, doesn't it? Yeah, it's great. We have a question from the floor.
Hi, I think I want to flag perhaps just sort of another concept, which is intercultural approaches. And certainly I work in the ageing sector, so building a little bit on what David said before, We're majority of our work is in the northern suburbs and also in the rural sector, which is of course another area that needs consideration. But we have now huge numbers of people who we see, perhaps 1 in 4 were born in another country post-war immigrants, and then they're being cared for. Possibly 50% of our workers, and I'd say that's the same for disability and health, are completely different groups of people from completely different countries. And there's a fascinating challenge or conundrum in that that we need to consider. And Alison, I think I'd say a lot of those people are the people we meet in supermarkets, and certainly they seem to sit in the fringe. There's a bit of the sort of tail wagging the dog, because there's a lot of those communities living in different parts of Adelaide, and I think we have to consider that, because they are our workers and often our lower paid workers, and how we engage those people is important too.
No, absolutely. I mean, 100%. Toronto's motto, if anybody, is diversity is our strength. And you can't, if you take a subway in Toronto and you find someone speaking English, you're doing well, you know, if you consider that doing well. But we've really worked very hard to figure out how to live together in a deeply, deeply multicultural way. And it doesn't come without its challenges, but everybody will tell you, if you go to Toronto and ask them what's our #1 asset, they will say diversity. So I think you can get to that point. You can figure it out, because you can't not use that talent. And right now it's being completely underutilized.
Yeah. Yeah. 2 more short questions from the floor then. Great.
Just want to pick up on something that David Knox said about branding and extend that question. So you talked about wine, food, tourism. When I think about those things, I think about our regions, David, and I'd like to ask the panel about how do we spread the message of a social or purpose economy into our regional areas, given that recently in the news our headlines have been occupied by Whyalla, Jamestown. These are all regional areas that are leading the way in innovation and jobs growth, and yet most of our conversation today has been a little bit CBD-centric. Yeah, so great. Comments, please.
Great question.
Oh, I'm absolutely with you. You know, if you're in South Australia, there's a huge game out there in the regions, and certainly what I loved most about my previous job in Santos was actually going out to places like Moomba and Baleara and all the way across the outback. It was absolutely fantastic. And so the regions, and same with the EDB, it's very important that we don't focus on Adelaide CBD especially, or even Adelaide, but we do get right out there, because there's been huge wealth created in our regions. There's an enormous opportunity for almost all the things we're really good at. A lot of them, perhaps not the universities, but even then they could be a bit more regional. But a lot of the things we're really good at here come from the regions, and you just named a list of a few, but you can add tourism on that list as well. So they're critically important, and we need to really keep them extremely healthy and strong. And countries such as Norway, funnily enough, they do that really well. You know, they push an awful lot out into the regions. They push government departments out. They push money out, all sorts of things. They really value it. I think we could probably do a bit more.
Mark?
Just to add on to that, my experience of working with people that live in small communities is that they're resilient. They haven't had a lot of services available to them. You know what? They just get it. They just get it bloody done. So they work together naturally. And an example came up from the Carers SA roundtable, and they were talking about lack of transport in regional settings. And in one particular town, they just worked out a buddy system. So if someone was coming to town, they'd catch a lift with a friend. And I think Alison actually fired up and got a bit annoyed with us all, because all of a sudden, as an organisation, if we did that, you know, this would be the risk. We couldn't do that, insurance and all these other things. And Alison said, you know, that's just not getting the job done. So be aware of the barriers, mitigate, but just get it done. And that's what communities and regions do really well.
Great. Thank you for sharing. There's a final questioner down the front. We might be able to squeeze you in. Is it short?
Really delightful with the open state that we've had this open conversation, but in the reading that I've been doing and exploring around the sharing economy, what we're seeing is a distrust, fear and moving away from institutions, whether it be the church, government or other areas. And when you mentioned you're the Refugees Association, I mean, South Australia is built on entrepreneurial refugees and we've now got them out. But in my contact with federal folks, we just hit a brick wall. So I'd be interested in reactions of, in our own little spaces, how do we engage with institutions to rebuild trust or rebuild engagement?
That's a
To rebuild trust in institutions?
Society seems to be mistrust and moving away from institutions, and so we're seeing more of the peer-to-peer stuff, but we do need to have a healthy relationship where there's engagement with institutions as well as peer-to-peer.
Well, I could take NDIS as an example, and Rob's sitting in the front row here, who's, I think, the conductor. Are we called the conductor or the coordinator? But anyway, whatever.
But a controller?
No, not controller. No, definitely not controller. The thing that, as Rob said, there's a huge chance that we're going to leave money on the table, by which Rob meant that there's $760 million a year coming to South Australia, but unless we actually have the service providers to provide the services to the people, the clients, the people who need them, then it ain't going to happen. But is an institution going to play an important part in that? I would doubt it. I think it goes right back to the regional question we had and other things. It's going to be people on the ground creating groups and organizations that are going to do this. It's not going to be the institutions. That's not the model. The model is the client will be able to choose, and they will choose the best providers who might be just down the street or they might be in the nearest town. But they can't be in, if you're in Whyalla, they can't be in Port Augusta. That's too far. It just doesn't work. So there's going to be an awful lot of opportunities for networks to be created, and that will create the real success in lots of little firms. And one of my friends has set up one of those little firms, and already she started with 0 nurses, and now she's got 30 already in about 6 months. Fantastic to provide that sort of thing. There have been lots of opportunities. But the same, I think, this goes for the whole state. I used to live in Los Angeles, and I often wondered what happened in the morning in LA. I used to drive into the center of town, and everyone was going all over the place. And I thought, what's going on here? And it took me a long time to understand. What's happening is there's thousands and thousands of small enterprises, 10 people, 5 people, all just going everywhere. That's going to be our strength, I think. It's not setting up some massive institutions who sort of conduct the orchestra. It's going to be having small to medium-sized enterprises who deliver services throughout the state. And we can really do it. We can do it extremely well. And we've got the brains, got the intelligence, got the universities, got the lives that we... So I actually don't look to the institutions to provide some form of whatever. It's up to us to do it.
I just wanted to add, I think it's kind of, I do think there's a loss of faith in institutions, and I think it's because the institutions are more and more behind and dragging behind community. And I think that the speed of communication has added to that. So the fact that we see the death of mass media because we have interactive media, and that in and of itself sort of says there's another story to tell. So I think institutions are going to have to learn how to be part of that conversation rather than lord it over the conversation, which traditionally, as institutions, we have done. It's the same as I feel about the power relationship between government and the citizenry. We've got to reshape it because it doesn't work anymore. And the healthy disrespect, it's almost that generational disrespect of the generation before, but now in so large that it is very hard to piece back together. So I think it's up to the institutions to redefine themselves in many ways.
I would say quickly that we live in this kind of era of broken systems all over the place, systems that were designed for a long time ago. But I would caution you to think sometimes systems work exactly how they meant to. So instead of just thinking necessarily that it's broken, think about what is the impact of the system, what is the impact of the educational system, what is the impact of the criminal justice system. In fact, we're designing those systems to do exactly what they're meant to do, which is often keep poor people down. And so I would say, put that framing on it. The other thing I would say is at the end of the day, because we're working with people, I would I urge people to advocate with empathy and recognize that people have their own limitations and their own bosses and their own regulations. And instead of, although there's a place for angry marching, I think to be much more impactful, it's to figure out who your allies and champions are and what you want to do together. I think by advocating with empathy, we'll get to a new level of impact.
Now there's one final question at the back.
Just building on the diversity as an asset, and then linking that also with the fact that we want the youth, the 18 to 30-year-olds, to be involved in this. And if you looked around the room this afternoon, as we are here listening and thinking about our challenges ahead, dare I say it, that probably 80% of us are not in that demographic. How is it that we could get that younger demographic and the diversity involved in the committees and the discussions that we need to have to embrace these challenges and solve these challenges?
I think we just need to do it differently. So obviously, we got an 18-year-old in the room. Was it 19? 20. Oh, sorry, you're a bit old, but
Yesterday, yeah.
they communicate differently. I can go to a coffee shop and there'll be a couple of 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds sitting across the thing, and they're on the phone, texting I don't know if they're texting each other, but they're texting and talking and everything all at the same time. So I think how we engage them and get them involved in innovation is different. And one of the things that I think we really need to do is go to the universities, work with the universities and people in the community, and just say, look, here's some social challenges. Come up with a solution, and come up with a solution that looks very different to what we've got, and just see what they come up with. And then, if they want to turn it into a startup, let's sponsor them. Let's just make it happen. Go with a good idea, and together, we can support them. I was at a NAB talk the other night, and they have a NAB lab, not advertising NAB, but and they actually sponsor startups. And what they do, they have a right to be on the board of the startup, and if they really think it fits their business model, they'll even offer to purchase it once it's tried and tested. Why can't we do the same in the community sector?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is I think we should be much bolder in promoting younger people into more senior positions much, much earlier. And when we're risk adverse, and we don't take the risks. And I think it particularly, if you want to take the highest level, particularly applies to gender and boards. Mm-hmm. And the reason you often hear sitting around a board table is, well, and I'll say, oh, she's very good, but lacks the experience. Well, hang on a minute. If you don't give her the experience, you've got no chance. So we've got to be much bolder around, so you don't get into this ridiculous do loop, and at the end of the day, all the boys have the experience, and they're all old, and they're all from the north side of Sydney. It's actually useless. It's useless. So how do we break that? That's one, we've all got to ask ourselves the question, because a lot of us in this room probably do boards. How do we say, why the blazes don't we have some youngsters on our boards? What are we frightened of? So why don't we do it? The second thing is in the institutions, which you've talked a little bit about, they need to be bold. And it's an extraordinary thing. In the UK government, it is rather extraordinary. What they do is they bring in some young graduates, and they identify the ones that they're going to think have the potential to do this. And then after 3 years, they give them a triple promotion. But you have to apply for the job, and you have to win it. But if you win it, they give them approval to go for a triple promotion, which basically means you go from the age of 25 after 3 years into a job that a 45-year-old would do. So you go boom. And they've done this for the last 15, 20 years. They call it the fast track program. And they do it because they want their permanent secretaries to be in their early 40s, not in their late 50s. And they also want to give women the opportunity to become permanent secretaries, because if you don't promote them before they're 25 into top job, then it gets a bit more awkward. So these things, that's highly bold. That's an institution that's highly bold. So I think boldness and doing it thoughtfully, and we can really lift, because goodness sakes, if you don't have a young person sitting around the board table, you're not in the conversation.
Yes, here. totally agree, and a great place to finish our conversation for today. I am going to take my leave and invite Rob de Monte, the chair of the Social Capital Residencies, to provide the vote of thanks.
Thank you. We're running behind time, so I will be brief. It's my pleasure to provide today's vote of thanks. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the speakers for taking part in today's event, in particular Alison for her oration and the wonderful insights from this trip, the call to action, which I think is really important, and even possibly the prescribed reading that we have to do before you get back. Also to our other panellists, Mark, David and Lois, thank you for providing some really valuable thoughts and insights as well. In lieu of speaker gifts today, the Don Dunstan Foundation will be making a small donation to Speaker Charity of Choices through Good Thanks, so I thank you on their behalf. I'd like to thank and acknowledge David, Janine and Rose from the Don Dunstan Foundation. They have put in an enormous amount of work, not only for today's event, but for the whole program, the Thinkers program, and this would not have been possible without their fantastic efforts. So thank you to you and the broader Don Dunstan Foundation. The Open State Management's staff who have worked together to deliver today's event is really important, and of course Mia for her fantastic facilitation of today's event. I'd like to acknowledge the partners of the Social Capital Residencies, and in particular today's event partner, Community Living Australia. Thank you very much, Mark. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for attending, and please stick around if there's some networking that you want to do. I think there will be some networking outside, but if that's it for you today, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.